Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to today's presentation on supporting distance learning at home, tips for caregivers of K-5 students with Associate Professor Jelena Obradović, organized by the Stanford Graduate School of Education in partnership with the Stanford Faculty and Help Center. My name is Manaf Mansour, and I will moderate today's Q&A session. It's great to see so many of you join us today as we explore tips and opportunities to support our kindergarten through elementary school students in developing routine, connection, and ongoing desires to learn as we start a very different school year. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jelena. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, everybody. I am Jelena Obradović. I'm an associate professor at Graduate School of Education. I'm also a mom of a 5-year-old and 8-year-old, and I just survived my first week of distance learning. Before launching into my presentation, I want to talk a little bit about what inspired me to create this handout. So back in March, like everybody else, I was very quickly adapting to having 2 kids at home while also working, and realized that there's a lot of very simple strategies, very simple tips that I just wanted printed out and kind of taped on my refrigerator, so that as I pass it, as I'm taking deep breaths and kind of feeling like it's overwhelming, I can take a look at and try yet another strategy. This tip sheet, I think in the Google chat, there will be, in the chat box, there will be a link to it. What I do want to say is that this tip sheet is not by any means a fix to the current situation we're all in right now. We need bigger systemic changes and responses, but rather it is a kind of a family toolbox of things to try and things to start. It is also not a comprehensive toolbox that will address all the parenting issues that we may have had before Corona, that may have been amplified by Corona virus and the current pandemic. It is also applicable to all children, but it doesn't uniquely address the needs that special needs families and students have. The tip sheet is really trying to take equity into consideration, but like anything aimed at individual families, everybody's situation is quite different. And so by design, it cannot be equitable, although all the tips require very little resources and can be easily tried. And finally, I do want to emphasize that I study parenting and stress physiology and self-regulation of younger children. And so what I'm not going to be talking today is adolescents who do have kind of special needs and demands, and for whom maybe a different tips would work better. And so this is the tip sheet that I think you'll be able to download it. What I want to do today is, rather than go through individual tips or these categories, what I want to talk today is few themes, few kind of take-home messages that I think are really prominent through different tips on this sheet. Okay, so really the first 3 kind of points on the tip sheet deals with the structure. And, this is really grounded in the literature that children really thrive best when they know what's expected of them. And so one of the things that I think really helps with the new start of the school is to start a new routine, start a new schedule, figure out where this distance learning is going to happen, and what are the clear expectations and rules that we have for our children. And I think it's really important that we start talking about them when we are all rested, when we are proactively not, setting some expectations rather than dealing with the problems. I think this is the moment where children can give an opportunity to have ownership over the space, whether that is bringing a pillow or decorating the schedule, or really engage in a discussion. This is often what teachers do anyway at the beginning of the school year, kind of sit together and come up with some contracts, talk about why certain rules are important, why certain expectations are important. And so you can do it as a family, or you can amplify your teachers' voices. And so I just mentioned that my youngest has started kindergarten. And so teachers often give these little phrases that I think it's really helpful if we as a parent amplify it. So My kindergarten now knows that, eyes are watching, ears are listening, and they also have a really cute thing that says brave in front, which really kind of helps kindergartners who are starting something completely new for the first time to really talk about these feelings of being scared and anxious and worried, and how we really need to put the brave in front and kind of challenge ourselves to try something new. I think while the structure is important, I think the next theme that I really, really want to emphasize is that flexibility is key to this, right? So schedules and routines make this very unpredictable, uncontrollable situation for children a little bit more predictable as they know what to expect. But at the same time, schedules and expectations have to be flexible. They have to be revisited in order to meet everybody's needs. And specifically thinking about younger children, we need to ensure that they, in this Zoom world where they're expected to log in, log out, log in, log out, that there is a room to get up and have some wiggles. Maybe you talk to your children and have the read aloud be in a soft, cushiony couch, and then they move to the table when they have to do learning work. So building some of the components where there is a movement. Some of the kids in these very challenging times can regress in skills that they had before. And so rather than getting frustrated about that, understanding that sometimes certain expectations have to be adapted, and they have to meet your need as a parent, they have to meet your child's need. And so really revisiting, and if possible, engaging your teachers in discussion in terms of what is a must, what is an optional, what is working for your family, and what is creating more stressors and more challenges. I think that's important. I think at the same time, there's few little things that kind of help kids get through the schedule, especially younger ones. Sometimes having that water bottle break, or, being able to keep those sleep routines consistent as much possible, I think helps kids be flexible and adapt to kind of ongoing demands that they're getting right now. I think another thing that I want to highlight, that it really is about good enough parenting, about the progress that kids are making, and not worrying about specific accomplishments, but just really emphasizing the effort and trying and making small progress. I think it's what's going to happen, keep everybody a lot more sane and happy and help us get through the day. So we have structure, we have flexibility, and then we have agency. I think that I want to highlight, as you guys are all quite aware, this is a very stressful situation, and a lot of things that are happening right now are out of children's hands, especially young children's hands. And so this is the moment that, based on research that we know, is when things are uncontrollable and stressful and out of kids' hands, creating those opportunities for them to be genuinely helpful is really, really important. And that could be in the shape of, giving them a chore that can really help around family, maybe helping with older siblings can help younger siblings. Sometimes it could be just making your own snack, or helping with, household chores. And then the other thing is really trying to figure out new opportunities for independence. A lot is expected from them right now. And I think if we can create very clear guidelines in things that they can do for themselves that maybe we've done for them before, I think that helps them grow and have confidence and feel like they are contributing to the community at home. And so I think trying to find those small opportunities throughout the day, I think really helps. This goes without saying, it's stressful. Current situation is stressful for parents, they're stressful for adults. And I think one of the key kind of points that I'd like to make is that it really is important to acknowledge those feelings. And so I think children do much better when we as a parent give them a voice. Sometimes when they're frustrated or angry, or even when they're worried, young kids can start acting out. And so giving them the name of the feeling that they're feeling and understanding the causes behind them is really important. So that could be something as simple as saying, I see you're frustrated when this happens, or giving them the sentences that they can say, you know, I feel mad when my brother does so and so, you know, and we use this all the time in our family because, you know, my 5-year-old, when he gets frustrated, sometimes he'll just growl, you know, at everybody else. And so giving them the words to actually say what they're feeling and how they're feeling, and why they're feeling, I think helps everybody understand where the stressors are coming from. I think as somebody who studies stress physiology, one of the things that we forget is when these feelings get too big, it's sometimes you want to launch into solving them or addressing them. And I think we are all going to be in a better space if we take few steps to just calm that body stress response. And that could look like closing your eyes, taking a few deep breaths, you know, sometimes holding an ice pack. You know, I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but these days when somebody gets just a little bit injured around the home, there's these oversized reactions. And so just holding that ice pack sometimes lets us kind of like disengage from angry feelings or upset feelings and put us in a better place to discuss the solutions that we have. This is another place where I think listening to what teachers are saying, and if there are some catchphrases that you can, as a parent, use in your home, it's really helpful. And amplify, kind of create that consistent messaging between what they're hearing in the Zoom sessions or over slides, and what words you're using to help them get through these kind of hard, anxious, worrying moments. I think empathy also goes a long way when you tell your child, I understand, or it's totally normal that you're feeling this way, or I feel this way as well. I think those things go the long way of creating that close relationship and trust with your child. And I think it helps deal with the stressors when you're heard and understood, and also reassured that feelings are understandable. One of the things that I think we forget is that it's really important to create this moments of joy, belonging, positivity. We're spending so much time together in small spaces, and it's easy to just get frustrated about things going not the right way, to point at problems. And I think it's really important to increase that experiences of positivity. And it may sound like, who has the time, who has the energy, but sometimes even the small things can make a huge difference. And so again, some of you have maybe started school already, some of you are starting next week. But I think creating new rituals and routines can really help set positive tone. And so one of the things that it's probably easiest to build in is the morning routine. It could be during the breakfast, it could be before the breakfast, and that could be, you know, a special greeting. Maybe every member of the family decides one day, is it going to be a wave? Is it going to be a silly dance? Is it going to be, you know, elbow bump? Like, what you're giving the agency to each member of the family to do something. It could be a dance. It could be maybe the joke of the day, or something to kind of bring us together. It doesn't have to last more than 5 minutes, but it kind of gets those endorphins going, gets the body ready, infuses just a little bit of positive, silly, funny energy. Around my home, you know, there's a lot, you know, all the jokes are on the table. Slapstick, sarcastic, mama jokes are always better than dad's jokes. Even potty jokes are these days allowed. And so really increasing that, I think it's really important. At the end of the day is another opportunity, you know. Sometimes, you know, you're exhausted, you're tired, you just want to be done with the day. And I totally get that. And I don't want to come across as saying that any of this is easy. but I do think it's worth trying. At the end of the day, just highlighting few positive things. By highlighting, we sometimes forget all the frustrating or challenging things. And it's not like those should not be talked about. I think, especially if there are opportunities for growth and you've seen how your child bounced back from something, I think it's important to say, look, I saw you struggle with this, but you've done such a great job bouncing back or sticking with it, even though it was maybe boring or stressful. And I think highlighting or saying like, I really appreciated when you did that, or I'm so proud of you that you did so and so. I think at the end of the day, giving the child a voice to talk about the positive experiences, giving yourself an opportunity to really highlight for them, to praise that effort, to praise that progress, to really tell them what you appreciate about their attempts through these challenges, I think does make a difference and sets a good tone. So the next slide, I think it's really a critical one. So much of the tip sheet focuses on children and how we can help the children. And obviously we're in this role of being assistant teacher in some sense and helping manage the routine, your own routine, one child, second child, third child routine, and that can be really exhausting. And I think this is a kind of a non-brainer. None of these tip sheets are new, tips are new, but they're just kind of important to revisit and have somebody kind of like reminding you of these things, and that we do need to take breaks. And sometimes those breaks are maybe just a minute. If you're dealing with a challenging situation or a child who have made a poor choice or a child who is frustrated and you're feeding off of that frustration, it is completely okay to say to your child, I need a minute. I just need a minute. I am not in a position to be a good parent or to make good parenting choices right now, and just walk away and take a few breaths and come back. Or just tag in or tag out if you're lucky to have a co-parent or somebody who is a caregiver, and basically say, I'm tapped out, I'm decisioned out, I'm touched out, I'm exhausted. Could you please take care of the situation? But those small breaks are not going to sustain us, right? So we also need to take longer breaks to recharge, to treat ourselves, to ask for help. And I think one of the key things is to really reduce worries about things we can change, reduce feelings of guilt that we may have, and really try to maintain our own well-being, because I think it's difficult to support your child's well-being when you yourself are depleted. And I think recognizing those moments and taking the break that you need is really critical. So one of the things that I do want to highlight before we jump into Q&A is that, what I love about parenting, and I've said this before, is that, every day you can try again, right? And these tips may not work for every family. There's a lot of them there. You may want to try one or two. They may not work at first, but they may work eventually or may help you a little bit, right? And so I think just this emphasis on, every day creates a new opportunity to kind of do it a little better, or make it a little easier, or try something else that reduces that stress and increase that positivity and make a small progress yourself or you as a family. I think with that, I'm gonna turn to Manav and maybe we can open the Q&A session.
Many of you have submitted questions ahead of time. Thank you so much for doing that. And taking a look at the chat and the questions that are coming through right now, it looks like there's a lot of questions about self-regulation and maintenance, a lot about belonging, and definitely about motivation and keeping our students and our learners motivated to continue to do their best during this time. So Jelena, just right off the bat, a question that we have for you is, how do we foster motivation to learn? How can parents help our kids focus on their schoolwork without needing to hover over them?
I often think of motivation kind of in two ways, right? One is And I'll draw for anecdotes. I will draw from my own child experiences a little bit and then link it to kind of research. Is, when one of the things that's really important is to start thinking about these things ahead of time before they become a problem. And this is why I mentioned setting those joint expectations. So sitting down with your child and be like, okay, we're starting a new year. This is what I expect from you. This is what you can expect from me. Why is this important? And then when things go kind of off the tracks, you can always reference those expectations back and be like, remember, we agreed, this is your job or this is my job. I think sometimes it's important to talk about, to hear kids, like what is frustrating to them, like why they find maybe the schoolwork boring or something that they don't want to engage, reframing those maybe repetitive tasks. So I have a kid who say like, I don't want to do the math, it's too easy or it's too boring. And so we talk a lot about like, building a good skill habits, right? That it's really important that you get maybe faster. Yes, it's too easy, but if you, get faster or more accurate, then you can get more challenging problems, right? For kids who are really struggling with attention and being motivated, I think creating a more bite-sized either task, so taking a large task and breaking it down into smaller components and giving them a chance to kind of create a progress, whether that's like crossing something or putting some stickers. I think also using timers. I think timers are great attention tool, and there's really cute and easy ones that kids can, even 5-year-olds can manipulate and use. And so again, either chunks of task or chunks of time. And so like, why don't we start focusing 5 minutes? I think if you start with something that your child can accomplish, you can start building off of that, off of those successes. I think, again, going back to the feedback, I think the specific feedback that really emphasizes to them the effort and progress is really helpful. So, it's easy to forget to point out when things are going well, right? Because you're like, oh my God, things are going well. Let me focus on my work, right? Let me focus on what I'm doing because my kid is on task. But to really say, I see how you stayed on task, or I see that it was challenging or boring or frustrating, but I'm so proud, or wow, you can do this right now on your own. Like, I'm blown away. Like, really show them that you see when they're trying and when they're making that progress. I think, you can use also experiences that they love as kind of like, hey, I know you're dragging your feet to do this, but if you do it now, you're going to have more time to play a game with me, to play a video game. So some people like to use reward language. Some people like to avoid reward language, so you can make it about time. We often talk about like, look, it's taking a long time just arguing about this, right? If you only have done it, but you can also reverse that and say, hey, you done that so fast and now you have so much more time, right? So rather than kind of complaining about what kid is doing, when they do it, you can just make a big deal about that. Like, look, you've done it. And now look, all this time you can do to do the thing you love, right? And so I think those are some tips for things that are like repetitive and just hard to stick with it. I hope that helps.
That's great. That's great. And just to follow up on that, then, are those strategies or tips that we can use when kids feel challenged, or when students feel like they just want to shut down, or they're just easily frustrated? Are those strategies that we can employ as well?
Right. I think it's a little bit, you can take a little bit different approach when, kids are shutting down, right? Like something is too challenging, or, somebody, I think, and they're just embarrassed. I think in those situations, it's really important to talk about the feelings, right? To really acknowledge that, yes, sometimes it can be scary to try something new. It can be embarrassing to make a mistake, right? And really talk freely, opening. Like in my family, and again, thanks to the school, we talk a lot about how you can be brave until you're scared first. Like, it's just, those two things are together, right? you're brave because you were scared, right? And so this being scared is completely something normal. I think you also want to normalize mistakes, right? To say like, hey, making mistakes is like completely how we learn. And I often say to my kids, like, when I made a mistake and I fixed it, it's like, that's the thing that I remember the most. You know, I don't remember the times where like I had something correct. I remember when I made mistake, right? And so really saying, and genuinely, this can be just a lip service. You just really have to be like, hey, making wrong choices, making mistakes is part of the learning process, right? Again, I think my older son has a phrase from a school that says, mistakes are expected, respected, inspected, and corrected. Maybe there's another one, but I think it does build that idea of like, we're expecting mistakes, we're gonna take a look at them, we're gonna fix them, you know, they're normal. I think I often use sometimes with children, like, you know, how, examples of things that they've already conquered and that it's easy for them now. So I say, you know, sometimes if you start with like infant examples, you know, young kids can giggle. Like, you know, one time it was hard for you to crawl and it was hard for you to walk. And, you know, you're riding bicycle now, but when you started riding bicycle, it was so hard. Can you imagine if you gave up and you didn't do it? And, you know, and so like, what would your life look like if you didn't have all these amazing skills that you have now? So like reminding them that everything is challenging at first. And with that goes modeling, right? Modeling that in yourself, right? And so, you know, when I play with my kids, you know, I often like, they'll say like, do you want a hard or easy? And I'm like, oh, I want a hard. I really like hard stuff, right? Or if I get stumped, you know, I try to model being excited about that, right? Another thing that I think helps, that also has research to back it up, is if they're learning something new, you can make them an expert, right? So like my youngest is learning Spanish now. I don't speak Spanish, I speak a different language. And so I say like, teach me, can you be my teacher? Like, so then that gives him a kind of an opportunity to, you know, internalize what he's learning. And I am even less expert than he is in whether it's a math or a Spanish or something else. And so giving them an opportunity to teach you, I think also kind of lowers that barriers of challenges of scary. And I don't know how to do this. Oh, my mom knows even less and I can teach her. And so I think modeling, giving feedback, talking about those feelings and really accepting them as normal, validating mistakes as just, you know, a fun way to learn.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. We were actually seeing a question that's kind of being elevated within both the Q&A and the chat. So I'm going to kind of paraphrase the idea. I hope I do justice to the audience member who's asked this, and I'm going to ask this question to Jelena right now. Do you have any tips for helping students balance speaking in Zoom classes to not be too distracting while also engaging in a conversation? Oftentimes our students are adjusting to this new normal, as we all are in our work and many other lives of how we interact with individuals. And there's some added pressure in terms of needing to perform and needing to really showcase what they're able to do. And so wondering if there's any tips on best ways to invite participation in a Zoom space.
Depending on the age of a child, right? I think one of the things that help is helping them understand the perspective, right? And so it's easy to focus on what other people are doing, but it's not always, you know, kind of clear what that looks like from the other side, right? And so I think talking, you know, with our kindergarten, we often talk about like, look, they can't see your face, you know, or you have to sit up because you're showing that active listening, that you're caring, you're showing to whoever is speaking that, you know, you are, you know, paying attention, you're caring for what they're saying, right? And so I think often trying to give them a role and understand how they're contributing to this community experience is really key. I think with older kids, you can take it a step further and, you know, talk about like, if we are chatting on a side, like, is that, what is that communicating to teachers? What is communicating to others, right? How can we get the attention, right? Like, what is, like, kind of almost a zooming out and talking about, look at how kind of chaotic this is. And if we're all not, talking at the same time or walking away from a screen, like, what would that look like if you were in a classroom, right? And so, like, trying to remind him, like, some of these things, teachers are able to manage and help in the classroom, right? And I think I already see, even during a 1 week of, being in this myself with a new year, I think teachers are doing a great job setting some, Zoom standards, setting up some breakout rooms where kids can really talk to each other in just pairs, and I think there's a lot more connection that's happening. Maybe that's not quite yet there for kindergartners, but for my third grader, he's spending a lot more times in these breakout rooms where he's just having genuine conversation with 1 or 2 peers, right? And I think this is maybe just a plug to say, giving teachers a little bit of freedom and room and time and patience. I think they are trying to use some of these platforms to the best of their abilities and kind of still in real time learning what works and what doesn't, right? I think maybe balance with that is trying to figure out what are the opportunities off screen, right? So, and knowing your child and where your child limits are. So, setting some expectations and talking through what that looks like and why they're important for the community and for the learning, but then also knowing where your child is just at the limit and, closing that screen and, finding other ways to engage is really important.
We always get a question about this, and I have to ask you this in reference to our work today with our kindergarten through elementary school students, and it has to do with screen time. And should we limit or control screen time? Is there a recommended amount of screen time that we should be enforcing, especially given that the screen is one of the only and one of the prime social and interactive pathways and channels? What are your suggestions for what we do with screens?
Absolutely. I think prior to this situation, I think screen times, had a really bad reputation, right? And so, and we, there were all kinds of guidelines for all kinds of ages. I think this situation specifically has really, and even before, has really, I think, emphasized how not all screen times are created equal, right? And so, a video chat with a grandma, a video chat with a friend, is a different than just, passive engagement with the screen. And so I think it's really unfortunate. We need to kind of diversify our language because not everything is screen time. Reading a book, on the iPad, like, that's for kindergartners through these platforms that now teachers use should not be called screen time. And at the same time, we need to kind of think about engagement with these different modalities, right? I think one thing that's really important when it comes to screen time, and this is true even before the situation, is often it's not the screens, but it's really about behaviors and feelings that kids have before, during, and kind of after screen time. And so I think discussing those rules and expectations, right? So in my family, begging for a screen time is a sure way not to get it, right? We talk a lot of, before with the screen time, we talk a lot about stopping and how important it is to know when to stop and to have good way to stop it and not kind of throw that temper tantrum, right? And so, and you set those expectations when they're really motivated to get that screen time. And you say, look, I'm waiting, I'm watching you. It's really important. You love this, but if after the end of this, you're crying and I'm upset and you're upset, and we're fighting, then none of this was really a pleasant experience. So like before any of this happened, you can talk through this, right? And then back to that, if they're able to disengage, from it, I think praising that, right? It's like, wow, I really can trust you. I really can, I see you are, capable of, doing, and that makes me feel like next time I can give you a little bit longer to do it, or a little bit more, because I can see how you're regulating your emotion. And even though you want to continue doing it, you're listening, you're respecting, you're stopping. Wow, I'm really impressed, thank you. And now, wasn't this a fun experience, right? I think there's a little bit of that. I think older kids, there's wonderful tools on the internet around digital agreements. So with older kids who you may not know what they're doing, or maybe you're not, participating. So with the younger kids, I think screen time that's together on the couch, it's a different feel, and it doesn't drain in the same way when the kid has to, hold the screen up by themselves and they're doing it all by themselves. So, sometimes my kid just wants me to watch him play, or wants me to literally lean on me, because there's so much physical need these days. Kids don't get that rough and tumble that they get with their peers. And so there's this huge amount of need to being in physical contact. And so he'll literally ask me to sit so that he can play something, and lean on me. And so thinking about, screens, not all is equal, not all is the same. And I think really focusing, rather than on a screen, maybe what is the behaviors of that screen time elicit in your kids, and how can you proactively set some rules, and then when the kids follow through, how can you positively, reinforce those rules. The other thing is just, I think, it's unprecedented time. We're all, at kind of very low capacity. And so giving yourself just opportunity to relax those rules and realize that, yes, it's going to be, more screen time now, but the bigger picture, if your kids are doing well, watching an educational show, playing a collaborative game, having a screen time, talking to a friend, it is what it is, right? It's back to that good enough. I think sometimes the guilt that we feel about the screen times and the stressors, and then how that seeps into our relationship and communication with the kids, is actually maybe doing more harm than yet another episode of a nice PBS show or whatever the kids are doing, or even when we say educational games, I feel like as a developmental psychologist, I want to say there's a lot of games that kids love. They can also be educational. They don't have to have an educational label, but any game that kids are creating or collaborating or working, my family right now, we play, all four of us, we play peaceful Minecraft, for example, right? And so we're creating, we're talking, we're sharing, we're collaborating, and it's a different experience, I think.
Kind of playing off of that as well, we're seeing a lot of questions and chat comments about other modalities off the screen. So I know we talked about, just playing with the screen, but having your son be in your arms to have that physical touch, or playing a really great game of Minecraft, or some really great collaborative board game together. Are there other tactics or other kind of lessons around the home or in a local neighborhood that we can maybe tap into to help with some of that interaction and some of that kind of self-curated learning?
For sure. I think, so I think pretend play is the big one, right? And so I would say in my home, the last month, I would say it's a month of building forts, right? And so everything available, whether that's, couches, cushions, or blankets, or pillows. And sometimes it's my kindergarten will take 30 minutes just to set up the fort in which we will read a book, right? And so just building forts is a big thing. I have 2 kids, and those games that we were talking about, like video games, they have seeped into their reality. So they call them reality video games, right? And they're playing pretend play, but walking around, mining at the trees or building some stuff, or, so they're just using their space and environment to collaborate and to just chat and, have that pretend play. I think it's hard because different families have different risk levels. And so I think, if your risk is, if you can leave home and it's too risky for your home, I think I've seen wonderful playing of, with the screen that is just there for chatting, right? It could be Legos playing or building blocks, and you have that kind of parallel play with another person. And every once in a while, you don't even look at the screen, but screen is there so that 5, 6 year olds can playing Legos and they can just chat with each other. And just like in real life, there's 5, 10 minutes of silence, and they'll be like, look what I did, there's this, or crafts, it could be drawing, and just being okay that kids don't always talk, or sometimes they'll talk but don't look up. And so having that kind of virtual chat is a very different thing than, let's say, a screen time where you're like forced to look and kind of behave in front of the screen. I think outdoors, with masks, with social distancing, I think biking, hiking, scootering, anywhere where the outdoor space is allowed. I think right now in California, it's bad air weather. And so I think that's difficult, but, just creating opportunities for kids to run, climb trees, play with water, getting muddy, getting hands-on, getting that tactile experience is, a nice antidote to sitting in front of a screen.
I'm seeing a lot of questions and comments related to just kind of balancing things at this time, especially as many school years have gotten started, or some are about to start. Some are kind of waiting for Labor Day to come about, and Tuesday's a big day for many folks. And a question that I'll kind of summarize from the Q&A and from the chat kind of has to do with daily interruptions. How do you manage a 4-year-old walking up to you saying that they need to get something done, a 7-year-old having access issues to Zoom, and someone maybe not understanding how to tackle an assignment, and knowing that you as a parent or caregiver are the person they're going to come to ask those questions? What do we do?
I think a little bit echoing the last theme is about, asking for help and support. And I think my heart goes to all the single parents there, and I'll address that as well. But I think, knowing kind of like working with the family members, especially adults, to kind of have this, you're on or I'm off, working with your employer. I know that a lot of companies are trying to kind of protect certain times, acknowledging that, parents may be more on during certain school hours, and being open with that. I think trying to understand who's kind of a designated parent or caregiver in any given moment. I also think this goes back to the independence and, creating a little kind of tip sheets yourself or your family, like, encouraging. It's easy when you're stressed to just do something for your child. Like, your child needs the water, I'm going to go pour you a glass of water, or I'm going to make you a snack, or let me do this for you. And I think this is the moment where, like, you really need to sit down and be like, okay, what are the things that I've been doing for my kid that my kid can do on their own, right? And I think this also gives them an excitement, like, oh, I'll open the refrigerator, I'll make myself a snack, right? And so that's one thing. It could be creating a cards, index cards that you post and be like, if you have a question, 1, did you try it yourself? 2, could you wait? Is it emergent? Does it have to happen now? 3, could you be doing something else, right? So having maybe discussing with your child, if they run into a problem, is there something else they could be doing? I think kids are getting very savvy with troubleshooting. So again, like, creating troubleshooting guides in terms of, and practicing that maybe even before school starts, like, this is how you click on the Zoom link. And if you get kicked out, what do you do? And then having them generate solutions, I think also helps them remember, right? So like, okay, it's not a big deal. Like, again, sometimes the kids are really freaked out. Like, okay, I was on the Zoom. This just happened yesterday to us. So I was on the Zoom, and then I was kicked out, and it was freaking out, but it's like, be like, okay, calm down, happens. It's all the time. Teacher's not upset. This is what you do. How did you get on the first time? That's what you can do again. Like, go to your calendar, press the thing. I've been so impressed at kindergartners learning how to mute and unmute themselves. It's not all amazing, but it's like they're practicing, and be like, and acknowledging that, helping them, like, yes, sometimes when you press, it doesn't work, and technology is tricky and finicky, but like, just keep trying, and so I think it's between, giving them tools to solve themselves, telling them when it's absolutely okay, absolutely you cannot be interrupted, so having some signs and be like, okay, giving them alternatives, what they can do during that time. And I think teachers are understanding, everybody's trying their best, right? And so being kind to yourself, being kind to your kids, like knowing that everybody's trying their best. And so coming up with these kind of almost an algorithm, like do this, or you can do this, and just rehearsing those ahead of the problems, I think helps.
Go ahead and pivot to a group of folks that you just mentioned in your last comment, our teachers in particular. we're seeing a beautiful alignment and hopefully more collaborative relationships between teachers and caregivers and the student in particular. And for the caregivers out there and also for the teachers out there, what are some of the conversations that you think teachers and caregivers should be having with one another when a parent or a caregiver is observing X, Y, or Z behaviors in a student? What's a great way to have a meaningful and co-constructive conversation between a parent and a teacher?
There's a lot of opportunities around well-being. I think one of the things that I've wrote about is that, and I think lots of school districts are recognizing this, is that it's really about the well-being right now. It's not about standardized tests. It's not about, achieving particular goals. It's just about like keeping it together, right? And making sure that this is not too stressful, that it's not too overwhelming, that kids are feeling happy, that they can still have some joy about learning. They still connected to their peers and teachers to some extent. And this is really what parents are kind of an expert on. That's what they do every single time, every single day. That's what they're doing. Somebody has asked, like, SEL is really hard to replicate at home. What do we do? And, to me, like, I love seeing that question because SEL is what parents do even before SEL was a term, right? We socialize our kids, we help them regulate their emotions, attentions, we teach them how to resolve conflicts with peers, how to with siblings, how to talk to each other, we discuss what responsible decisions are. And so I think there's a lot of common language and interests and needs between parents and teachers, right? So teachers being focused on that and parents. And I think as a parent, I think it's really helpful to hear from teachers how they're handling that, right? Because what would happen if the kids were in classrooms right now is the first few weeks would be all about setting expectations and setting up rules and setting up, whether that it's, rewards or, or kind of like what's expected and what are the natural consequences. So having that dialogue between parents and teachers is around like, what are the tools that you would have used in school, in your classrooms, right? And I think also just, it's hard sometimes as media to teachers also forget. So the same way we parents sometimes forget, oh, wait, I should do this. Like, this is what I've been doing anyway. I think teachers are kind of trying in the moment to adapt. What is that like natural classroom management, student support? How does that translate through this like screen time when we are not in the same space? And do I still have agency that I do in my classrooms over, 25, 30 little screens and wherever those kids are, And so I think communicating to parents and kind of really forming that partnership with parents, but also acknowledging the situation that every family has, right? And the kind of inequities that exist right now. And so I think for teachers is, talking with the administration to create those pockets to connect with parents and understand their situation and understand what are the barriers, right? What are the barriers? Are there language barriers to even understanding what teachers are expecting? Is there barriers to kind of what other family members are doing and to the schedule that the school has sent, right? Is there a specific needs to the child, and how the schedule and expectations are matching? So I think it's really about the clarity of communications and knowing what school expects, what parents can manage, how to get on the same page, right? At the same time, building a huge amount of empathy, right, for each other. Because I do think, it is about creating just caring relationships too, and understanding each other's situations rather than like venting at each other. I think that does go a long way.
Seeing this question pop up, we've touched on it a little bit, so this might be kind of summarizing a few things we've already mentioned over the past hour. But what is your advice for helping children that feel a little more isolated when doing distance learning, or for learners that are a little bit more introverted? What are ways that we can help and support them at this time?
For the children who, are maybe shy, they may be starting a new school they have not started before, right? I think it does help to visualize, like that transition. So I think, we're today driving to actual physical school to pick up some materials. And I think even just like getting to see what the school looks like, even though we're not going to approach anybody, we're just going to, have masks and stuff, like kind of creating like, oh, this is your school, or this is where your teachers are going to be, and this is where you're going to be. I think creating smaller groups of connection. So whether that is connecting with a teacher during a lunch break, or, finding that, I think, finding that other child in the community where they can, have some, one-on-one conversation, it's really helpful. I think what's nice about, a little bit older kids who are using other platforms to post their work is they have this like off-screen time to share their learning, right? And so if you're shy and inhibited and you don't want to talk on a Zoom, you still have an opportunity to upload your work, or to send comment, or encourage kids to share their ideas and thoughts, maybe not in such a visible way, but, they can still, share their work that they're doing, whether that's written on a paper and then taken a picture and share with the teacher, or maybe, there's this off-screen ways to kind of share their experiences. And then I think creating those smaller pockets of like one-to-one connection, whatever it's feasible, whether it's feasible with teacher or with another peer, or in the family, like just discussing what that experience is like.
Perfect. And we're going to go ahead and start to wrap up. And I have one last question, and just something for us to think about moving forward and into the future. What's the silver lining? What are we learning here during this time of sheltering in place and distance learning? And what are you excited about as you study all these great developmental opportunities for adolescents and for kindergarten through elementary school students? What can we look forward to? What can we, as caregivers, as members of the education community, look forward to learning and maybe influencing in our next phase of teaching and learning?
Sure. I think that the smallest single silver lining right now is that nobody's commuting, right? So I think that there's that, right? So if you're a parent who is getting ready to, drive your child to 3 different places, you're not spending that time in a car. And I think those small pockets, you can kind of try to fill them with some connection within the home. I think the silver lining that I see is stronger connection between teachers and parents, right? Because I think this situation has brought us to better understand what teachers are doing. And it's also, I think, creating opportunities for teachers to see a small windows into families' experiences. And I think that school to home partnership has always been like a big goal for educators, right? To like create those connections better, to, align the messages to work, because we are working as a team to support our kids, right? And, in past, it has been challenging to find the times to come to the school, or to, there was no windows or opportunities for, teachers to kind of understand what each family is dealing with. And so I think the opportunities to create those relationships and those connections and the communication channels, if that can continue when this all passes, I think that's going to be an incredible step forward in supporting our kids in kind of a more holistic way and creating that school to home partnerships.